Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to this press conference organized by ESCR-Net, together with our incredible members, La Ruta del Clima, Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, and Comité Ambiental and Defensa de la Vida. We gather here in Belém at COP30, a space that was meant to confront historical injustices and climate colonialism. But 30 years on, what do we see? We see more exclusion, we see more control, and we see more corporate domination. And less spaces for peoples defending their lands, their lives, and their future. And when I say corporate domination, when I say corporate capture, this is what I mean. The very polluters who created this crisis, they're now writing the rules, and they call it solutions. Carbon market, that swap, the blue economy, you name it, these are not solutions. They are colonial scams. So we are here to reclaim the narrative, dismantle false solutions, and center people's-led solutions. Solutions that redistribute power away from corporations and giving them back to the communities. That's grounded in human rights and rooted in reciprocity and not profit. So as I'm speaking here, and while communities are struggling to survive through the climate crisis, trillions of dollars are keep fueling that. And let me be clear, the fate of the loss and damage fund, so-called, now barely hold 400 million US dollars, while the global military spending went almost nearly $3 trillion already a couple of years ago. So the world has money, but then it is channeled for political domination, genocides, and destructions of the planet. So before we hear from our incredible speakers who will debunk further these topics, I want to share with you a written statement from the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate Change, Elisa Morgera, so I will read on behalf of her, who stands with us also in affirming that human rights and people's-led solutions are centers to the climate action. This is the statement from Elisa, and after that I'll go with the other speakers. States in the global north must ensure that international cooperation on climate change, including international scientific cooperation, international climate finance, and technology co-development, support people's-led climate solutions, including with a view to sharing learning from the global south to the global north. As underscored in each of my thematic reports, the persons and communities who are most affected by climate change have the deepest and most systemic understanding of the root cause of the disproportionate impact of climate change and transformative solution at the nexus of climate, nature, water, food, and health to the benefit of everyone's human rights to a healthy environment. In particular, states in the global north should be ready to implement the human rights to remedy in the context of defossilization, the elimination of our fossil fuels dependency across all sectors of the economy. Effective remedies from the environmental and human rights harms of fossil fuels can support transformative change by reclaiming spaces for self-determination for communities and peoples, transforming our economies and protecting the climate, nature, water, and food on which our life depends. Effective remedies must be co-developed with affected human rights holders. The most affected human rights holders are best placed to holistically assess impacts, including loss and damage experienced, taking into account intersectionality and historical and structural discrimination. This is where more effective and inclusive climate solutions can come from their lived experiences. Private companies have international human rights responsibilities, including beyond what states require them to do under national law. Fossil fuel companies must cover the full cost of the closure and cleanup of industrial complexes to avoid toxic legacies in terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems. And they must provide financial compensation for victims commensurate with the gravity of their human rights impacts through the effective and meaningful participation of victims in defining remedies based on self-identified needs and priorities, as well as in implementing and monitoring remediation measures. For their part, states, according to their historical responsibility, current contributions, and respective capabilities, must regulate private companies so that fossil fuel companies provide compensation for the widespread, substantial, and protracted human rights impact of their operations. These companies should provide financial compensation for damage caused throughout the fossil fuels life cycle domestically and extraterritorially. So states must set and enforce strict financial penalties for human rights abuses by fossil fuel companies and requiring fossil fuel companies to finance climate adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage, for instance, through climate superfunds, ensuring that they are directly accessible by affected communities. Recognizing and supporting peoples-led climate solutions can help mutual learning and transformation across levels and knowledge systems. We can nourish hope and share concrete learning that can inspire a course correction towards a safer climate for all. Finally, at COP30, considering the need to create and expand multilateral spaces that recognize peoples-led climate solutions and integrate these learnings in the evidence base for meaningful decision-making, we are launching, in collaboration with the Brazilian Special Envoy on Just Transition and Human Rights and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, a journey towards a pledge, which will be an opportunity to co-develop an inclusive and innovative process to connect, advance, and share knowledge on concrete and transformative commitments to implement the human rights-based approach to climate actions. This could be the space for building everyone's capacities to appreciate, learn to listen to, and support peoples-led climate solutions, and for more meaningful matching of resources with peoples-led solutions. I warmly invite you to engage with this initiative that will continue until COP31 and beyond, and share your views and ideas about the preliminary guidance of on the Sumauma Pledging Tree for human rights-based climate action, advancing harmony with nature through human rights solutions. Without further ado, and after that opening statement by Elisa Mergera, I would like to give the floor to Marta Devia, and then Marta will be followed by Adrian, and then after that will be followed by Anna of APWLD. You know your order, so please also feel free to introduce yourself. Take the floor. Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yo soy Marta Devia Grisales, miembro del Comité Ambiental en Defensa de la Vida. We are part of the global network ESCR-Net. COP30 is repeating the same vicious circle. Year after year, climate negotiation has been shaped less by science and justice than by corporate power. We reject the corporate capture of the global climate agenda and the growing presence of thousands of fossil fuel lobbyists from one COP to another. Corporations don't only attend, they shape the agenda, pushing carbon markers, green extractivism, and other nature-based projects that displace indigenous people, peasants, and sideline the urgent measures needed to phase out fossil fuels. If COP30 is truly about protecting peoples and the planet, it must systematically restrict corporate influence in all climate and energy transition negotiations. We need a conflict of interest policy that require every participant to disclose ties to polluting industry so decisions can finally be made in the public interest. Communities across the globe are resisting false solutions, gathering our own data on the impact of climate change and human rights violation. In Tolima, Colombia, our community-led research shows how climate impacts are tearing apart traditional agricultural systems. We are losing crops, seeds, knowledge, and the ability to read the seasons. We are left with anxiety and deepening food insecurity. But it is not only in my community. From Mongolia to Sonora in Mexico and Kenya and Zimbabwe, communities, rivers, and lakes are being destroyed, as well as ancestral governance systems, cultural practices, and community care structures that have protected this ecosystem for generations. To end this global pattern, we demand binding obligations to hold corporations accountable for this crisis. States, specifically those in the global north, must adopt measures to ensure genuine corporate accountability and support the UN Treaty on Human Rights and Business, which is currently being negotiated in Geneva. Of course, corporations have blocked it. People-led solutions also demand that we confront occupation, militarism, and the use of energy to fuel genocide. The military industry is one of the largest consumers of fossil fuels on Earth. Both the UN Treaty on Business and Human Rights and COP decisions must include measures to sanction, divest from, and hold legally accountable and corporations helping to commit genocide, war crimes, or other serious human rights violations. Also, states involved in these crimes, they must also face consequences. Governments should follow the examples of Colombia's coal export ban on Israel and support global campaigns such as the global energy embargo for Palestine. COP30 must stop decisions that commodify nature and expand unproven technologies. It must uphold the right of nature and the rights of the people who protect it, like peasants, indigenous peoples, and other frontline communities. People's solutions are part of the broader movement for justice and liberation, because real climate solutions come from peoples and not from polluters. We must put an end to corporate impunity. Thank you.
Reparations. That is one of the scariest words for any negotiator in this conference, and it has been for the past 3 decades. And it is very scary for them because this whole process is built on how to keep making profit without changing the economic actions that have caused climate change. And why is that? Because if you address the harm that the economic activities have caused, then you have to change what you do to make money. But instead, the UNFCCC has spent decades on how to profit with every single action that is taken here to stop climate change. And it does not want to address consequences. Reparations to climate change is not something that is not addressed. It is addressed by communities, it is paid by communities, and it costs lives. But within the UNFCCC, there is no desire to stop profit. Why do we now redefine through the ICJ and the Inter-American Court advisory opinions what is reparations? It really only implies that people are now reassured that they had always the right to claim reparations, to claim that they have equal rights, that there is not a bigger need of companies over their territory, over their ecosystem, over their livelihoods, over their future. Reparations implies that we have to reconceptualize what is loss and damage, because loss and damage, it is not an action. What do you do with loss and damage? You repair it. And that is something that has never been put into the words or the text of the UNFCCC. You acknowledge a problem, but you make no action. Repairing loss and damage, it's a legal right and an obligation of states. And what does that entail? That people have the right for their homes, for their ecosystems to be restored to the state that it was before the adverse effect of climate change. That is not adaptation, that is not mitigation. That is what it ensures for people to stay in their land and to prosper. It also implies for this process to actually be successful, because harm has to cease. It has not to be repeated. And for 30 years, harm has continued, emissions have not stabilized, and ecosystems and people have been destroyed. Reparations means closing the loop of an economy that generates externalities and people and planet pay for it, while some rich persons in the global north mostly profit out of that misery. Reparations means legal consequence, means justice. It also means that it is an obligation to provide resources to restore, to repair, to compensate, to provide satisfaction to those that have been harmed, because no one, no community has that duty to endure harm. But states here, even though still after the ICJ, they open their mics and say that they do not recognize the opinion as something legally binding, have the obligation to repair. That is what is different, because now we know, and now we can read from the highest courts, from the human rights courts, that what has been done here is an illicit act. It is a crime against people and planet.
Hello, good morning. My name is Ana Celestial. Allow me to speak here on behalf of my peoples in the Philippines for the Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment, as well as for our sisters in Asia Pacific Forum for Women, Law, and Development. And I'm also speaking here as part of the People's Rising for Climate Justice. I'd like to share with you our analysis on collective care and feminism, and why is it very important here in spaces like COP30 in Belém. A feminist analysis grounded in collective care is actually a radical challenge to the systems of colonialism, patriarchy, and capitalism that is deeply embedded in our world and have fueled ecocide, war, and violence from the Philippines to West Papua to Burma and beyond. For decades, militarism, colonialism, extractivism, and corporate greed have turned our lands into battlegrounds for profit. Typhoons and climate disasters in my country, the Philippines, in Bangladesh, as well as war-fueled displacement in areas like Burma, are made even worse by greedy, corrupt governments and complicit corporations. Collective care rises from these crises in the form of community-led relief, community-centered and community-led disaster response, because our governments do not respond to us, or they're very negligent in that way, or in community-led agroecology and energy systems. And these are the types of real solutions being led by women and the marginalized. With the climate crisis, we also see false solutions, like Marta has mentioned, abound, such as green markets, carbon credits, renewable so-called green energy, and critical minerals mining that actually perpetuate violence through dispossession, militarism, repression, and disaster-induced displacement. Militarism and war serve corporate interests and destroy ecosystems. But at the same time, they also forge the strongest networks of feminist resistance and survival. We have Mama Josefa in West Papua. We have the Karen peoples in Burma, where there is collective care that fuels ongoing struggles for self-determination and just peace. We offer solidarity to actions such as the Rise to Resist International People's Tribunal on Palestine happening in Barcelona on November 22nd because we care. To care is to act, to resist, to unite. And to care is not passive. It's an active insurgency against the violence of typhoons, of war, of ecocide. To care is frontline solidarity. It is a solidarity of women, indigenous peoples, peasants, the poor, all rising in defense of land, body, and future. Women-led, people-centered collective care delivers real solutions. We expect these solutions to really make changes on the ground and amplify solutions also being proposed that are centered on communities and people at our government, local government level, as long as it really serves the interests of the most dispossessed and poor. It centers our stories, our leadership, and our demand for climate ambition rooted in equity, peace, and genuine emancipation from the violence of empire and profit. To end, collective feminist care is both a survival strategy and the very core of people's-led solutions, demanding system change and disrupting the profit-driven climate colonialism enforced by greedy elites and militarists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrian, Marta, and Ana. We have 2 minutes for one question and then response from the speakers. So the floor is open, show of hand. Yes, please. You have a minute to answer, to share your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for your presentations and for amplifying people's-led climate solutions and denouncing the ridiculous market-based initiatives promoted by the most polluting industries present at COP30. As we know, we the communities have the solutions to the climate crisis and alternatives, way to organize our economies and societies in more just, equitable, and sustainable ways, and our biggest obstacle is corporate power. So my question to you all is, how do you in your networks and your communities organize to fight against corporate power inside and outside climate policy making spaces? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's a perfect question for everyone to respond to. If you feel comfortable with it, you have 30 seconds, each of you, to respond. Thank you.
There you go.
Please.
I think the first thing is resistance, speaking truth and speaking your rights, even though it's not welcomed by those in power, is the first thing you have to always do, because oppression requires resistance. If not, then you're subjugated and you have to exercise your rights.
Let me try in English. For us, for our communities, our most powerful tool is the education, popular education. We identify those corporate powers, and we try to explain to our communities, and also linking or doing a connection with schools and university. But for us, that's quite important, just to show how those powers are so terrible for us.